Wyoming Territory, 1886. By sundown, Silas Ward could lose more than his life, and Nora Quinn could lose the ranch her husband had left behind. The bank draft slid across the table and stopped beside Bram Cole's whiskey. $10,000. Vance Crow kept one gloved hand on the paper, while the room above Dry Cedar's finest hotel went quiet. He pushed a charcoal sketch forward. An older man, gray beard, wide brown hat, dark poncho, 2 holsters, a gray horse standing behind him. Bram looked at the drawing. Then he looked at Crow. His face changed so little that another man might have missed it. But Crow had spent years watching people decide what they were willing to sell. $10,000 for the old man, Crow said. Bram did not reach for the draft. He pushed it back across the table. Crow's jaw tightened. You misunderstand the offer. No. Bram's eyes stayed on the sketch. I understand it better than you do. He stood and buttoned his coat. My life's worth more. The words landed harder than a threat. Bram Cole had killed men for less. I had ridden through mining camps, cattle towns, and bad country, where reputations were usually settled with powder and blood. Yet one look at Silas Ward had made him leave $10,000 untouched. Crow watched him reach the door. What is he to you? Bram stopped. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint rattle of glass beneath the wind. He's the reason I still have a right hand. Then Bram walked out, across town. Silas Ward knew nothing about the bank draft. I was riding ash toward the North Cattle Trail, hoping for supper, a stable, and one quiet night before moving on. Instead, he found a chain stretched across the road to the railroad loading pens. Nora Quinn stood beside a wagon, while Crow's riders blocked her cattle from passing. Dust clung to her skirt. Her jaw was set. Her hands were steady. Silas slowed Ash. One of the riders looked him over and smiled. You lost, old man. Silas said nothing. His eyes had gone to the weathered survey stone, lying beside a fresh cedar post. It had been pulled from the ground. And that was the moment a man who wanted no trouble realized someone had gone to considerable trouble to move the truth itself. Silas Ward kept his eyes on the survey stone. The cedar post beside it was new, the cut wood still pale beneath the dust. The stone was not. Its edges had been rounded by years of weather, and the mark carved into its face had been meant to stay where a surveyor put it. Now it lay on its side like something someone wanted forgotten. One of Crow's riders shifted in the saddle. You planning to stare at that rock all day? Silas looked toward the chain stretched across the cattle trail. Nora Quinn stood beside her wagon with the reins in one hand. Behind her, restless cattle pressed against the road, tossing dust into the dry Wyoming wind. How long has this been here? Silas asked. Nora answered before the rider could. 3 weeks. And before that? We used this trail to reach the railroad pens. The rider smiled. You hear that, old man? Used to. Silas dismounted. Ash stayed where he was, ears turning toward every movement around the gate. Nora watched Silas walk to the post. She did not step behind him. She did not ask him to help. That told him almost as much as the stone did. Crow owns this ground, the rider said. Maybe. Silas touched the empty depression where the marker had once stood. But somebody moved this. The smile disappeared. Nora's gaze dropped to the disturbed earth. For the first time, anger gave way to something sharper. Possibility. When a rider let his hand drift toward his revolver, Silas noticed. He did not reach for either Colt. Instead, he lifted the chain from the iron hook. Metal scraped against Cedar. The sound carried farther than it should have. You open that, the rider said. Crow will hear about it. Silas looked at Nora. Your cattle going to the rail pens? If they don't, I miss the shipment. And if you miss it? She held his eyes. I miss the payment on my note. That was enough. Silas pulled the chain aside, then moved them. Nora hesitated only a second. She climbed onto the wagon and snapped the reins. The cattle began to pass. Neither rider fired. Silas stood beside the open trail, while hoofbeats rolled through the dust. When the last animal cleared the gate, Nora stopped her wagon beside him. You just made yourself Vance Crow's problem. Silas looked down at the displaced survey stone. No, his voice stayed quiet. Looks to me like Crow made himself mine. And from the hill above Dry Cedar, a rider had already turned toward town. By late afternoon, dust from Nora Quinn's herd had settled over Dry Cedar like a brown veil. Silas Ward found her outside the freight yard, repairing a split trace on the wagon instead of celebrating that she had made the rail pens in time. "You always fix your own harness?" he asked. Nora pulled the leather tight. "When there's no one else to do it." Silas nodded toward the cattle. "Crow been making that trail difficult long?" "My husband used it for years. After he died, Vance Crow offered to buy the ranch 3 times. And you said no. He offered half what the ground was worth." Silas glanced toward the railroad tracks beyond the pens. Nora's ranch sat between Crow's southern range and the loading yards. A narrow strip of land, but in cattle country. A narrow strip could be worth more than a wide one if every herd had to cross it. "If he owns your place," Silas said, "his cattle go straight to the rail." Nora finally looked at him. "That is why he wants it." A voice came from behind them. "And why you should leave it alone." Deputy Owen Beck stood near the yard gate, one hand resting close to his belt. I was younger than Silas by more than 20 years. But the tired look around his eyes belonged to an older man. "Crow says you opened his barrier," Owen said. Silas looked at Nora. "Wasn't his trail?" "That question is not settled. Neither was the chain." Owen exhaled. "You think this is about one fence?" "No." Silas watched him carefully. "That's what worries me." Owen's eyes hardened. "Crow owns notes all over this county. A man can hate him and still owe him enough to lose his house." Silas waited. Owen looked away first. "My father borrowed from Crow's bank. My mother still lives on that ranch." There it was, not cowardice. A leash. Nora said nothing. Silas did not offer comfort. He only asked, "How long do you plan to let that debt wear your badge?" Owen stared at him. For a moment, the freight yard went quiet, except for cattle shifting behind the rails. Then the deputy turned and walked away. Nora watched him go. "You make friends everywhere you ride?" "Not usually." She almost smiled. Then she reached into the wagon and pulled out a folded bank statement. "You wanted to know why Crow wants my ranch." Silas took it. 2 new charges had been written into the account in darker ink. Neither had been there the month before. The next morning, Nora spread 3 years of receipts across a table in the back room of the bank. Silas stood beside her while Eli Dunn locked the door. The clerk was 43, careful with his hands, and nervous enough to check the hallway twice. "You should not have brought these here," Eli whispered. Nora flattened one statement. "Your bank added charges that were never in my husband's note. I don't set policy." "Good," Silas said. "Then show us the original." Eli looked at him. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then the clerk opened a drawer and took out a bound file. Nora recognized her husband's signature before Eli laid the paper flat. She traced the line once with one finger. No penalty clause, no new handling fee, no language, allowing the interest to be rewritten at Crow's convenience. The room seemed smaller after that. "How many?" Silas asked. Eli went still. Nora looked up. "How many what?" Silas kept his eyes on the clerk. "How many other loans changed after they were signed?" Eli swallowed. 11. The word barely carried across the room. 11 ranches? Nora asked. 11 accounts I know about. Eli opened another ledger, then another. 3 properties had already transferred to companies tied to Vance Crow. The names on the deeds were different, but the same 2 witnesses appeared again and again. One ranch had been marked delinquent on a date, when a receipt showed the payment had arrived on time. Another had been charged enough to push the owner into default within a month. Nora sat back slowly. The chain across the cattle trail no longer looked like one act of greed. It was part of a machine. Block access, raise pressure, break the ranch, buy the land. "Why didn't anyone put this together?" she asked. Eli gave a tired laugh. "Because every family only sees the page ruining its own life." Silas looked at the ledgers. "Then we put the pages together." Eli's face tightened. "If Crow learns I showed you these, I lose my job," Nora answered quietly. "If he keeps doing this, other people lose their homes." Eli reached for clean paper. He began copying names, dates, and altered entries by hand. Near sunset, Silas carried the first pages to the eating house, where Owen Beck read them beneath a smoking lamp. Halfway through the second sheet, the deputy stopped. "This is fraud." Silas looked toward the front window. Across the street, 3 unfamiliar riders sat their horses without speaking. One watched the door. Another counted the windows. Silas folded the papers. Owen noticed. "What?" Silas kept his voice low. "Crow just found out we started counting back." By noon the next day, Silas Ward had learned enough to know that the 3 riders outside the eating house had not come to Dry Cedar for cattle. He still did not confront them. That bothered them more than a threat would have. Late in the afternoon, Silas saddled Ash and took the south trail through a broken stretch of sandstone country. The horse slowed before the narrow cut. Silas felt it through the saddle before he saw anything. Ash's ears turned toward the ridge. Fresh hoof marks scarred the hard ground above the trail. Little farther on, horse droppings lay beneath a ledge where no traveler had reason to stop. Silas dismounted. "Stay." Ash moved behind a shelf of rock. The first rifle shot came a heartbeat later. The bullet tore leather from the rear of the saddle. 3 more shots cracked through the canyon. Silas was already behind stone. He did not try to answer every rifle. 8 men had chosen the ground. That meant their advantage lasted only as long as he stayed where they wanted him. Silas listened. One rifleman fired too quickly. Another kept changing position. A third waited between shots. That was the one Silas watched. When the patient man leaned too far from cover, Silas fired once. The rifleman dropped back, clutching his shoulder. 2 men climbed down the ravine to flank him. Silas moved through a shallow wash and came out beside them. His Colt was already raised. "Don't!" One of the men stopped. The younger one reached anyway. Silas fired into his gun arm. The revolver hit the dirt. The second man slowly lifted both hands. Silas could have ended both of them. "I did not. Stay down if you want tomorrow." He reached Ash and rode for open country. 5 riders followed. At the first steep bank, one horse checked hard and threw its rider into the sand. Their line broke. Silas used the confusion to reach a bend where sandstone narrowed their approach. One boy charged around it with a rifle. Silas shot him through the upper arm. The others stopped. Silas did not wait for them to become brave again. I took the rear trail back toward Dry Cedar. Near sunset, Nora Quinn saw him ride into her yard. Blood darkened the edge of his sleeve. The saddle was torn. Ash was breathing hard. Nora crossed the yard without speaking and reached first for the horse. Silas noticed. "You hurt?" "Not enough to matter." She looked at the blood. That is usually what men say before they fall over. Silas almost smiled. Then hoofbeats sounded beyond the north fence. Nora turned. 6 riders were coming toward her corral, and this time, they were not looking for Silas. Rafe Moss rode through Nora Quinn's gate just after sunrise, with 5 men behind him and a folded paper in his coat. Nora was already waiting at the corral. The shotgun rested across her arms. Silas stood near the barn, his wounded arm wrapped beneath his sleeve. I did not move forward. This was Nora's land. She would speak first. Rafe dismounted and held out the paper. "Bank repossession." Nora did not take it. "My payment is not due. Crow's bank says otherwise." Deputy Owen Beck arrived before either side moved closer. He'd read the notice once. Then again, his eyes narrowed. "There is no court seal." Rafe shrugged. "Crow owns the note." Owen turned the page over. "No docket number either. The cattle secure the debt. Not under the original terms." Rafe smiled. "You planning to argue banking law now, Owen?" "I'm planning to keep you from taking cattle without lawful authority." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Rafe looked past him toward Silas. "The old man won't stay forever." Silas said nothing. Rafe returned his attention to Owen. "Your mother know what you're doing?" The deputy went still. Nora saw it. So did Silas. Rafe stepped closer. "Crow holds her mortgage too." Owen's hand trembled once beside his belt. "If you make trouble here, he can call that note before the week is out." Silas watched Owen. He could have stepped in. He could have made Rafe look at the guns beneath his poncho and changed the argument. I did neither. Some choices became worthless when another man made them for you. Owen breathed in slowly. Then his hand stopped shaking. "Get off Mrs. Quinn's land." Rafe stared at him. "You sure?" "No." Owen lifted his eyes. "But leave anyway." For the first time, Nora lowered the shotgun slightly. Not because the danger had passed, because the badge in front of her finally meant something. Rafe mounted. As he turned his horse, he looked at Silas. "When Crow finishes with this town, you'll be gone," Owen answered. Before Silas could. "That's why I'd better learn to do my job before he leaves." The 6 riders withdrew. That afternoon, Owen carried Nora's statements, Eli Dunn's copied records, and the disputed trail information to the telegraph office. He wrote the message twice. The first sounded cautious. The second listed names, dates, altered charges, and the attempted seizure. At the bottom he signed, Owen Beck, Deputy Sheriff, Dry Cedar, Wyoming Territory. The operator looked up. You certain? Owen stared at his own name. No. Then he pushed the paper forward. Send it. The telegraph key began clicking. Outside, Silas saw a rider watching from the far end of the street. The man turned his horse north, toward Vance Crow's ranch. The telegraph office caught fire before dawn. By the time Silas reached Main Street, flames were already chewing through the roof. Owen Beck came through the rear window with the operator over one shoulder and soot black across his face. The man was alive. The wire was not. Vance Crow arrived on horseback, while townspeople formed a bucket line. He watched the building burn as if it belonged to someone else. Bad luck, he said. Owen turned toward him. You burned the only wire out of Dry Cedar. Crow smiled. Then I suppose things will be quiet for a while. Owen stepped forward. Silas caught his arm. Not here. He did this. Maybe. You want me to wait again? Silas looked at the burning roof. I want you to arrest him when you can keep him. Crow rode away before the last wall fell. An hour later, the operator opened an iron dispatch box pulled from beneath his desk. 2 message slips had survived. Owen read them twice. His report had gone through before midnight. So had the request concerning the disputed cattle trail. Territorial authorities had received the names and altered mortgage records. A county sheriff and an investigator were already riding toward Dry Cedar. Relief lasted less than a minute. Silas knew what the news meant. Crow no longer had weeks. I had hours. That evening, Bram Cole found Silas behind the livery, brushing ash beneath a cold Wyoming sky. You always know when somebody's behind you? Bram asked. No, Bram frowned. Could have fooled me. Your left boot squeaks. For the first time, Bram laughed. Then his face hardened. Crow is bringing men in from the north and west. How many? Maybe 17 by morning. Silas set the brush down. Bram studied him. You could ride south tonight. Silas looked toward the dark outline of Nora Quinn's ranch. I thought of Owen's name on the telegram. Eli Dunn. Bent over. Stolen Truth by lamplight. Nora standing at her own corral, with a shotgun she hoped not to use. I had spent years leaving before other people's trouble learned his name. This time, leaving would not make the trouble disappear. It would only decide who paid for it. Nora came through the livery gate. She had heard enough. You don't owe Dry Cedar your life, she said. Silas met her eyes. No. The wind moved dust between them. That's why staying has to be my choice. Before sunrise, Silas tightened Ash's cinch and walked toward the courthouse. Owen was waiting. What now? Silas looked at the church tower. Ring the bell. The church bell carried across Dry Cedar just after sunrise. Doors opened slowly. Men came from the freight yard, the smithy, the eating house, and houses beyond the railroad tracks. Nobody knew whether Crow's riders were an hour away or 10 minutes. That uncertainty made the street feel smaller. Owen Beck stood on the courthouse steps, with the surviving papers in his hands. Silas remained off to one side beside Ash. This was not his badge. If Dry Cedar was going to stand, it had to choose to. Owen raised his voice. The authorities have our report. They are coming. But Vance Crow has armed men, and they may reach us first. A rancher called back. Then why not wait? Because if Crow comes for the ledgers, the witnesses, or the cattle before the sheriff arrives, his waiting may leave nothing to protect. Silence followed. Owen asked for 6 volunteers for a lawful posse. Nobody moved. Then, Nora Quinn stepped into the street carrying the copied mortgage papers. Crow waited until my husband was dead before he came for my ranch. Every face turned toward her. He offered less than the land was worth. I refused. Then the charges changed. The trail closed. My cattle became harder to move, and my note became harder to pay. She held up the pages. I will testify to every part of it. Eli Dunn came next, with 2 bank ledgers wrapped in canvas. So will I. A blacksmith stepped forward. then the eating house owner, then 2 ranchers whose names appeared in Eli's records. Owen swore in 6 temporary deputies. A 17-year-old stock boy reached for a rifle. Silas stopped him. "I can shoot," the boy said. "Good." Silas handed him a canvas bag. "Fill that with clean cloth. Get water into the church. Find bandages." The boy stared at him. "You think we'll need them?" Silas looked down the empty north road. People live or die after the shooting, too. Hoofbeats sounded from the south. Every hand tightened. But the lone rider was Bram Cole. He handed Owen the charcoal sketch Crow had used with the $10,000 offer. "I'm taking my statement to the county sheriff." Owen looked at him. "You staying?" "No." Bram glanced at Silas. 8 years ago, he could have killed me and didn't. Unmounted again. I figure a man ought to make that mercy worth something eventually. Rota south. A minute later, Ash lifted his head. Silas turned north. Over the ridge, riders began appearing one by one. By the time the last horse cleared the rise, there were 17, and Vance Crow was riding in front. The 17 riders stopped 30 yards from the courthouse. Vance Crow sat in front, his horse stamping at the dust. For years, Crow had spoken through notes, contracts, foremen, and locked gates. Now he had run out of paper. Owen Beck stepped into the street with the warrant. "Rafe Moss." Rafe shifted in the saddle. "There is a warrant for you. Dismount and surrender your weapon." Rafe looked at Crow. Crow smiled. "Your mother's note comes due next week." A muscle moved in Owen's jaw. "You do this, she loses the ranch." "Maybe." The word came quietly. "But you still have to get through me first." Crow looked toward Silas. "So this is what one old gunslinger bought you?" Owen shook his head. "No." He opened one gate. "You did the rest." Crow reached inside his coat. Silas's hand moved beneath the poncho, but Crow pulled out the bank draft, $10,000. I threw it into the street. "Any man who puts Silas Ward in the ground gets paid." Nobody moved. Then one rider near the rear lowered his revolver. Silas recognized him from the sandstone cut. The young man with the wounded arm. Crow stared at him. "What are you doing?" "He had me dead." Silence spread through the line. "He let me walk." The revolver fell into the dust. "I'm done." Crow's face reddened. "You coward." Silas spoke. "No, just late to getting smart." Crow spun toward Owen and drew. Silas fired first. The bullet struck Crow high in the gun arm. His revolver dropped. Then Dry Cedar broke apart. Gunfire cracked across the street. Glass shattered above the bank. Ray fared toward Owen. Nora stepped from the feed store doorway and fired her shotgun into the trough beside him. Wood exploded across Riff's face. His shot went wide. Owen rushed Crow and drove him behind a water barrel. One temporary deputy fell with a bullet through the thigh. The stock boy crawled from the church with bandages and dragged him behind cover. Silas moved between wagon wheels and porch posts, firing only when someone forced the choice. A gunman came through an alley with his revolver raised. His weapon jammed. Silas had the shot. I did not take it. "Drop it." The man froze. Second chance. The revolver hit the dirt. Then another gun fell. Then another. The courage in Crow's line did not vanish all at once. It leaked out one man at a time, and $10,000 lay in the street, with nobody willing to die for it. When the shooting ended, Dry Cedar did not cheer. Smoke drifted between the buildings. A horse trembled beside an overturned hitch rail. 2 hired gunmen were dead. Several others were bleeding. Silas had a crease along his upper arm, where a bullet had torn through cloth and skin. Nora found him beside the bank. "You're hit. So are other men." "That was not what I asked." Silas looked at her. For a moment, neither moved. Then Owen called from the jail. Vance Crow sat inside, with both wrists cuffed. Rafe Moss occupied the next cell. Crow still looked angry enough to believe anger was authority. "You think this changes anything?" he said. "You need my bank, my freight contracts, my cattle." Owen looked toward the people gathering outside. "Maybe." Silas bent and picked up the dusty bank draft. Hine handed it to Owen. "Evidence." Then he looked through the bars at Crow. Needing what a man owns is not the same as needing the man. By sunset, the county sheriff arrived with 2 deputies and an investigator. They took custody of Crow and Rafe. Eli Dunn turned over the original ledgers. The disputed mortgage accounts were placed under review. No debt vanished. No ranch was magically returned, but the 11 foreclosures were halted long enough for the records to be examined. The cattle trail reopened while the boundary dispute was reviewed. Nora's herd could move toward the railroad pens without Crow's chain. Silas stayed 5 more days, long enough to see fences repaired, long enough for Nora to stop asking whether his arm hurt, because she already knew. On the last morning, Silas saddled Ash beside the open trail. Nora stood at the gate. "You always leave this early?" "Usually earlier." She looked south. "Road still goes that way." "It does." Neither said what rested between those words. Nora touched Ash's neck once. "You could stay until the arm closes." Silas looked at the ranch, the repaired fence, the cattle moving freely beyond it. The woman who had never once asked him to save her. His hand rested on the saddle horn. "Could." Then Silas mounted. He rode toward the open trail. The cedar posts still stood where Crow's chain had been. The chain itself was gone. Behind him, Dry Cedar still carried debt, bullet holes, and work that would take years. Ahead, the road remained uncertain. Silas touched Ash lightly with his heels, and for the first time in a long while, leaving felt less like escape than a choice. "Thank you for riding with us through Dry Cedar and staying with Silas and Nora until the final stretch of road. If this story of courage, justice, second chances, and the price of standing your ground stayed with you, tell us in the comments which moment meant the most to you. And if you enjoy cinematic Western stories filled with hard choices, quiet strength, frontier survival, and unexpected bonds, subscribe and join us for the next journey into the American West. Until then, take care, stand by what matters, and ride safe. Disclaimer: this is a fictional Western romance story inspired by life on the 19th century American frontier. Characters, events, dialogue, and dramatic situations are created for storytelling purposes. Historical settings and cultural details are researched for authenticity.